Hi, and welcome into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you here this week. I've got a great conversation with Bob Abate. Bob is somebody who has been passionate really since he was a young boy about learning about the experiences of his neighbors around New York City and their experiences that happened within World War II. So Bob has sat down and he's tracked down as many veterans as he can in that New York City area to really get their perspective, get their stories, maybe some things that they haven't been able to share with family, and get those recorded and be able to have those for posterity, and then also be able to even, I would say, help some of those veterans heal some of those wounds that they had during World War II. You're going to really enjoy this conversation. I do want to let you know, had a little bit of technical difficulties, and there's a couple of spots where there's some echoes, but it's not a big deal. And this is a great conversation to be having because on Monday, this will be Veterans Day. And so it's just a natural tie-in for what Bob's doing in Veterans Day. I also want to remind you real quick before we get started that the web store or the bookstore on my website is up and going. And as you can see, normally I'm wearing a red polo shirt with the Cool Grandpa logo and everything on it, but I've got the gray one on today. So if you're watching this on YouTube and you like this shirt, go over to cool-grandpa.us, look at the bookstore, check out the polo shirts, check out some of the hats, some of the mugs, some of that merchandise. And if you're so inclined and you want a great present for a cool grandpa, go ahead and make an order and we'll get that out to you just as soon as we can. So enough gabbing from me. Let's jump into this awesome conversation with Bob. Hi, Bob. Welcome to the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you on.
Good morning.
This is going to be a fun conversation. It's something that's really kind of interesting because I'm down here in North Georgia. There's been a big movement going on to capture some of the oral histories of the folks living in Appalachia, how those lives have all changed over the years. And what you're doing with World War II veterans is exciting because I think it parallels a little bit. What I'd love for you to do is give us a little bit of an introduction of yourself and then also let us know kind of what prompted you to start recording the stories and histories of World War II veterans.
I'd be happy to. I tell people my most vivid childhood memory was as a 3-year-old child sitting in the kitchen floor of my apartment by the Yankee Stadium in the South Bronx playing with some Lincoln logs. And my mother and father exploded in a kaleidoscope of emotions, hugging, kissing, crying, laughing, dancing, screaming, "The war's over, the war's over, the war's over." I had no idea what the words meant as a 3-year-old kid, but I knew something really special was happening. And that was the end of World War II. We lived in an apartment building with 48 tenants, and 5, I think maybe 6, were returning World War II veterans. One man, a good friend of my father, was wounded, and he was in a veterans hospital out in Staten Island. My father was a New York City fireman. We didn't have a car. And on several occasions, we take the local train down to South Ferry, Staten Island Ferry across the Staten Island, or a local bus. And all I remember as a 4-year-old kid visiting this man with these white-clad nurses pushing all these wounded sailors and soldiers and Marines up a big grassy knoll. And it had a profound effect on me. When I was 10 years old, it was 1951, the Korean War started. And to me, as crazy as it may sound today, there was nothing more desirable or noble than to kill communists in the name of the United States. I eventually went to the Naval Academy. I was there 3.5 years. And in my last year, I failed 2 engineering courses, and I was commissioned as civilian. And at that point, I thought my life was over because that was all I ever wanted to do was to serve my country. I eventually got my graduate degree. I was a civilian. But when I was in high school, I was a good student athlete, and I went to Manhattan Prep on the grounds of Manhattan College. And they offered me a scholarship to the college, which I politely declined to go serve my country. So once I left Annapolis, I thought, let me go back to Manhattan College and see if I can transfer some credits. Not many, they're mostly military, but some. And the dean of admissions looked at me very seriously and said, young man, we would not be the right school for you. And I was kind of astounded. I looked, I said, brother, why is that? He said, we offered you a scholarship out of high school. You turned us down. We don't think we should accept you now. I said, brother, I didn't go to form my owner. I went to go serve my country. And he said, well, I understand that, but still, we don't think we should accept you now. So I ended up going to Fordham University at night, and I got my degree in 1966. Years later, Manhattan College had a weekend MBA program, and it was near my house. I could almost walk to it. So I went down and signed up. And I would go down on weekends to jog in their indoor gymnasium, the Draddy Gymnasium. And hanging from the rafters were the names of all these members of the Manhattan College Sports Hall of Fame. And I recognized most of them. And one guy, Lenny Remingino, was the Olympic champion in 1952 in Helsinki in 100 meters. But there was this one name that wasn't there, and I thought, how come? Now, the Draddy Gymnasium, when I was in high school, was not the Draddy Gymnasium. That parcel of land was homecoming barracks and facilities for the returning World War II veterans going to Manhattan College on the GI Bill. And then years later, when there was no need for it, they tore it down and built a gymnasium. So I got a call one day, and I got an alumni magazine. They were looking for volunteers for the Manhattan College Sports Hall of Fame. And the caller came up. I said, look, I'd be interested, but let me be up front. I did not get my undergraduate here. I got it for them. Manhattan College wouldn't take me, so I don't think I qualified. He said, no. He said, any degree at all would qualify you. I said, in that case, count me in. And I went down to Manhattan College Library and got all 4 years of the Manhattan College newspaper, the Quadrangle, that this man, Tyrone Pannell, is at Manhattan College. I was a good track athlete. He was phenomenal. In 1 year in Madison Square Garden, he set 2 national high school records. He was a hurdler. He was a broad jumper. He was a batsman. He was a high jumper. He was phenomenal. And I put together a detailed proposal, about 10 or 12 pages, presented him for admission to the Manhattan College Hall of Fame. It got very contentious at times, but I was able to get him in. I was invited with my wife to the induction ceremony. This was 1990. And it was started with a Catholic Mass. We're in the back of the church. You don't know anybody. And when Mass is over, going down the stairs, I hear a young lady call out, Bob Abbott, who's Bob Abbott? I raise my hand. This young lady comes running over to me. She's wearing a Marine Corps fatigue jacket. Gives me a bear hug. She says, my daughter, you know. What do you mean? She said, I learned more about my father reading your proposal. I've known about him my whole life. Never knew his favorite color, favorite ice cream. You're now a member of my family. Supposed to sit with us for dinner tonight. That's going to be an honor. What happened was this man, Tyrone Pannell, graduated from Manhattan College in 1964. He was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. His daughter was born Memorial Day week, 19. He was killed in Vietnam, Thanksgiving week, 1965. So we're joining her and her family at dinner. And halfway through dinner, she looks at me and she says, you know, there's a book about Vietnam and my father's in the book. I'm a military buff. I save all kinds of military stuff. So I said, oh, I said, what book was that? She said, Dear America, Let Us Home from Vietnam. It was like she hit me with a prick. I said, my God. I said, I've had that book in my room for a couple of years. I didn't read it. I sort of browsed through it. And she breaks out in a big smile. And she said, that explains it. What do you mean? He said, my dad was talking to you. You didn't hear him, but you got the message. So I went home that night and I got the book, Dear America, Let Us Home from Vietnam. There's like almost 200 letters in the book. And the author, Bernie Edelman, author of Vietnam veteran, says, probably the most poignant letter in this book is from young Second Lieutenant Tyrone Pannell, who is there for daughter Tracy. And I'm going to paraphrase it. Dear Tracy, like most men, I always wanted a son. When I found out I had a daughter, I was somewhat disappointed until I saw you and held you and kissed you. Then I realized I was the luckiest man. Sons become men. Daughters become women, but stay daughters for the rest of their life. I'm going to be gone for a while. Make sure, let me teach you how to say, hello, Daddy. I love you, Daddy. I miss you, Daddy. And of course, never had that conversation. But it was seeing her reaction. This was 1997. Something in the back of my mind clicked. Because as I say, I'm a military buff. And 2 years prior, 1995, a local Westchester newspaper had a special pull-out edition for the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. Dozens of men in their military uniforms as young men hold the pictures today. And I thought to myself, my God, I got to thank these guys. And thank goodness there were no cell phones in those days. They still had telephone books. And I was able to contact virtually every man in the article and thank him on the phone. And with one exception, every single man said there's nothing to thank me for. I just did my duty. The only people you want to thank, you can't, because unfortunately they're over there in the little white crosses. And I would say, sir, I understand what you're saying. Can I ask you a question? Yeah, what is it? Would you consider a man awarded the Medal of Honor to be your hero? Oh, Jesus, absolutely. I said, sir, you're absolutely right. Approximately 435 Medals of Honor awarded in World War II. If those men had not served, or if those men had not been born, we still would have been victorious. I like to use the word win because war is not a game. But without the non-Medal of Honor awardees, men like yourself, we would not have been victorious. We wouldn't have the life we have. We wouldn't have the country we have. We wouldn't have the world we have. So in my humble opinion, you're a hero. I want to thank you. But I want to thank you in person. He would basically say, well, there's no need to. You just thank me on the phone. I'd say, sir, I'm not looking to do you a favor. I'm asking you to do me a favor. Can I please come by and shake your hand? Okay, if that's what you want to do, okay. And I'd go by each man's house with a little attaché case. I'd knock on the door, ring the bell, and invariably the first question would be, Bob Abbott, I don't know what your problem is, but you need a hobby because I've had more to tell you. And then I'd say, sir, can I ask you one question? Yeah, what is it? What is your memory of December 7th, 1941? And in every single case, the man was transposed to where he was. I was doing, so come on in. And after a few minutes, I say, sir, what you're telling me is living history. Unfortunately, it's not being taught. I don't have a great memory. I don't take shorthand. But in my bag here, in my attaché case, I have a tape recorder. Can I record what you're telling me? Yeah, go right ahead. And invariably an hour and a half later, I would leave with the man's story. I would tell the man I'm a two-finger typist. It's going to take a while. It's going to be totally unaudited. I'm not going to edit one word. You want I'm not going to change one word, one letter. And I'd go back a few weeks later and give the man the transcript. And I've done that over the years of what that's what all the guys have done with approximately 200 World War II veterans. And as you can all appreciate, their stories are very, very powerful and poignant.
That sounds absolutely an interesting process on how you went through and did that. And you gave us a great example, but was it the same process for connecting with the other veterans? You went through, called them up, and then found their addresses and showed up and asked them?
Every one of those men was in the phone book, and as I say, with one or maybe two exceptions, I contacted each one. The other thing that was very propitious, and it's just a question of timing, is that this was beginning in 1997 going forward, and that's when that movie Saving Private Ryan came out.
Mm-hmm.
And in my humble opinion, it was the most powerful military movie of all time. And these World War II veterans, in many cases, went. A number of men who were World War II veterans went to these movies and literally had to get up and leave and go out into the lounge and gather themselves. Or if a man didn't actually see the movie, he heard about it. So I was just lucky to kind of hit them at the right time. They were all retired at home. They don't maybe have a whole lot of things to keep them busy, and they were just thinking about the fact that, they're now in their 70s and their buddies never made it back. And I was just lucky in getting them at a very precious time in their life.
And I would imagine, too, that around that time, with the 50 years being passed the ones that were still around were maybe in a little bit more of a reflective period of their life, because I certainly know, just talking and hearing stories about veterans, especially coming back from the Pacific, but it probably affected everybody, is that a lot of people didn't want to talk about it because you couldn't relate and people just wouldn't understand. But I think maybe as that generation got older, maybe they became a little bit more reflective and maybe wanted to open up a little bit more about those experiences.
Well, it's a combination of those factors. I originally asked these men if they had ever shared their stories with their family and loved ones. And with rare exception, the answer was, "Oh, no, I don't talk about that." And I was a little surprised at once until I thought about it. Because normally the first question a child's going to ask a parent who is in the military is, "Gee, Dad, what did you do during the war?" And if you're honest and or brave and or maybe dumb enough, if you're a combat veteran, to tell a loved one what you did, invariably the next question is, "My God, Dad, how could you watch that, or how could you do that?" Because civilians have no concept of what war is. War is not 8 hours a day. It's 24/7, 365. And for most of these men, World War II was anywhere from 36 to 44 months. From December 7, 1941 to August of 1945, 44 months. And in many cases, it wasn't that long, it was 36. One man told me he signed up for the Dow. He says, "I don't mean DOW, Dow Jones, Wall Street. I mean DOW, duration of war." But with me, it was almost like they were going to confession, because here's a guy they never have to deal with again over Thanksgiving or the holidays. He's a military veteran, so I don't have to explain every third or fourth word. I get it all out, and I'm clear and free. So I was very lucky from that respect also to get them when I got them at a certain time. And yes, also, as you say, as they were older and more in a position to just realize how lucky they were to have survived versus their fellow countrymen who didn't make it, they're probably more likely to want to talk, especially at that point, to a stranger.
One of the things that I find is interesting, and I heard it on another podcast, and it's something that just resonated with me, and was this idea of the moral wounds or the spiritual wounds that go on, right? Because if you think about it, when we take these 18-year-olds that might have been Boy Scouts, they were playing baseball, doing whatever, good kids by general, standards, and then you thrust them into something where they have to do something that's totally against their upbringing, right? The "thou shalt not kill," all those types of things, and you have to. They're going through that conflict too, not just what they experience, but that morality part of it, I think, is starting to be recognized a little bit more amongst the veterans.
Well, that's certainly very true. I say to people that for a veteran, a combat veteran specifically, the war is never over. Between PTSD and survivor's guilt and physical punishment and maybe loss of limbs, that's for the veteran. The only day the war is completely 100% over is the day he, or in some cases she, dies. Because every single veteran, with the rarest of exceptions, that goes through combat has got to be affected by it, medically, psychologically, physically, emotionally, or a combination of all of the above. There's no way. The human brain is not designed for war, killing. No matter how religious you are or how justified you feel you are, it'll help to some extent. But that will never go away, that experience. And it's very difficult to come home and be a loving father and husband and spouse, and to just kind of put all that to the side and not have it affect you in a negative way in many cases.
When you started going through, you gave the example of the one man that you went up to and asked him about where he was on December 7th. Did you find that particular question, or was there a different question that really led into those conversations where they'd start to open up with you?
In virtually every case, when I first met the man for the very first time, and he was not all that interested in me talking to me because he figured there's nothing to talk about. I didn't do anything special. And I knew I wanted to, if I could, somehow trigger him to maybe open up a little bit. And I thought the most common occurrence to anybody that age, I say to people, if a man was 18 on December 7th, 1941, he was born in 1923. When he was 6 years old, the Depression hit. That 6-year-old kid had to learn to do whatever he could do to help mommy and daddy put food on the table, washing dishes, delivering newspapers, shining shoes, working on a farm. And for the next 12 years, all during his pubescent and his adolescent and teenage years, all he knew, there was no such thing as me, me, me. It was all we. Family, neighborhood, friends, and by extension, country. And I say to people, basic training is very important. Teaches you how to use your weapon, and that's important. But nothing more prepared these men emotionally and psychologically to go forward, sacrifice the way they did in those 12 years from 1929 to 1941, that there was something more important than themselves, bigger than themselves, by extension, that was family, friends, neighbor, and country. So, yes, December 7th was the day of their life. There's nobody at that point that didn't realize and recognize what it was. And that was sort of a trigger question for them.
Okay, that's interesting, because I think, too, as we start to collect oral histories from family members or from communities, I think it sounds like one of those important things to do is to find that one question that will start that conversation and get them into it. Because otherwise, as you said, with that experience, I've got nothing to say, my story's not important.
But I also think we have to be very much aware that that is their story to tell if they choose to tell it, and not to tell if they choose not to tell it. The last thing in the world you'd want to do would be to push somebody, because when you push somebody on a topic that's sensitive and that potentially explosive, you don't know what the end result's going to be. So it's always, would you like to talk about it?
Great point, because I imagine whether you're talking to veterans or people with some kind of a trauma, that they may have gotten to a point where they have finally been able to compartmentalize. And if they open up that box, there's a lot of issues and things that they're going to have to face again. And it will take them a while again to reach a state of peace.
I'll give you an example, if I may. And I don't mean this to be disparaging in any way, in any sense of the word, but I use the analogy with people that the war in Europe and the war in the South Pacific were like two separate universes. The reason I say that is when we were fighting in Europe, the Italians, the Germans, most Americans have European ancestors. And even though we were, let's say, an Italian-American or a German-American, we could relate to a person on the other side, even though we were fighting them, because their God was not Hitler, or their God was not, the president of Italy, Mussolini. But in the South Pacific, their God and their country were one and the same. Hirohito, their emperor, was their God. And I use the analogy somewhat, maybe a little bit irreverently, that the war in Europe was like a fight in a bar. And the war in the South Pacific was like a nice fight in an alley. Two separate, distinctive types of warfare. And especially for veterans of the South Pacific, as horrible as the war was in Europe, it's even more of a mark on these men from the South Pacific. I'll give, if I may, one example. I interviewed a man who was a Marine, a World War II Marine from the South Pacific, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. He was not a big guy. And I, in many cases, won't use a man's last name for reference to their family and their privacy, but I'll call by his first name, Joe. He was about 5'7", 5'8", and he was telling me that basically everything he ate growing up was something he shot: deer, venison, squirrel. And I was a phenomenal marksman that I never missed. Usually one shot in the head, I killed it. I had food for the week. And he said, the day after Pearl Harbor, I enlisted in the Marine Corps. But I realized that he had a young son at that point. And I looked at him. I said, Mr. So-and-so, I was confused. You had a young son. You didn't have to enroll and enlist or you would have been exempt. He slammed right through me. He just lit right through me. He says, are you suggesting I'm going to wait for those so-and-sos to come over here? No bleeping way. I'm going to kill them over there. And his was the most vivid, graphic interview I had, which is understandable for a World War II museum. He landed on Iwo Jima. He was fighting in Okinawa. And his whole demeanor was rough and tough, understandably. But on the Battle of Okinawa, the bloodiest battle of the Pacific, the bloodiest battle on the island was at Naha. Told me one day he's coming down the road and his whole demeanor changes. He says, I come down that road. He says, I see this dead woman. I see this little kid holding on to her. He said, I walked over. He said, I picked that little kid up, held him all the way back to the rear to the nurses. They gave him some of my certificates. But I think about that little kid all the time. I wonder if that little kid remembers me. Now, at that point, I belonged to a veterans group. And new guys come in every once in a while, and you tell them what you do. And a new guy came in, and I'm telling him I interviewing World War II veterans, and he says, oh, God, he said, there was one guy I interviewed you. I'd love to have met him. He was fantastic. He was real tough, SOB Marine. And I said, what's his name? He gives me his name. I said, I interviewed him. I interviewed him. He said, you got to be kidding me. He said, my God. He says, I'm best friends with his son. Now, at this time, the man had died. So I said to my friend here, I said, will you tell your friend and got a transcript? If he'd like a copy, I'd be happy to send it to him. He said, oh, no. The father, the son hated each other. He said, one of the happiest days for the son was the day he buried the old man. I thought, oh, my God. I waited a month or two, and I went over to the guy a second time. I said, look, I don't want to be a pain in the neck here, but you think your friend might change his mind? He says, I doubt it. Look, here's his phone number. You call. So I called the son up. I said, look, I probably shouldn't be making this call, but I interviewed your father. I've got a transcript. Would you like a copy? You got a transcript of my father? Do me a favor. I said, what is it? Burn the bleeping thing. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he hung the phone up. I waited a couple of months, and this is probably dumb, stupid, whatever. I called the son back a second time. I just wanted to double check. I'm not going to burn it, but would you maybe want me to send it to you? Send me the bleeping thing. He gives me his mail address. I sent it to him. I waited a couple of weeks. I called him back, and his whole demeanor on the phone thing. He said, oh, my God, he said, I read that transcript, and when I read what he said about the kid, the little kid, that's not his kid, I'm his kid. Carried the kid all the way back. He thinks about him all the time. Jesus, maybe he didn't hate me. Maybe I didn't hate him. He couldn't, the war really screwed him up, but if he thinks about that little kid all the time, he must have thought about me also. Oh, I wish I had that transcript years ago. Phone I had this years ago. Maybe I could have had a different life with my father. So you never know the effect that the episodes and these experiences these veterans have, not only on themselves, but their loved ones.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think it goes back to the point, too, where that father couldn't come home from what he experienced in the Pacific and tell anybody. Nobody's going to understand what it was like, the brutality of the island hopping campaigns and what they faced. And you can't share that. And then the psychological, emotional scarring, all that stuff.
Well, this man, I'm sorry, this man said to me he considered himself a failure. And I looked at him because he told me, he said that before they had Marine snipers, they had sharpshooters. So he was this company sharpshooter. He said, I never missed one of my targets. I always got him in the head. And even if he was in the midst of several civilians, I never wounded a civilian. But I consider myself a failure. I said, what do you mean a failure? He said, I only killed 37 of those so-and-so. Well, that's a lot of people, 37. He said it wasn't enough. He said, I wanted to get one for every star in that flag. We had 48 stars. I only got 37. The other reason I consider myself a failure is my company commander said to me, Joe, I'm going to make sure you get every medal the Marine Corps has to give you for your service here. My company commander was killed. So nobody knows what I did. That's why I consider myself a failure.
Wow.
I do want you to share another story about the UDT person that had his fins down in the museum. And then if you can share that story about how he got reunited with some of that gear and what that meant.
I'd be happy to. I tell people I don't really have a favorite, but if you held my feet to the fire and say I got to pick one, it would be this man. His name is Ray Hyman, and I will give his last name. Ray was born and raised in the South Bronx. He was born Jewish, but he was never really raised in any one particular religion. His father was in the Army, cavalry in World War One, and he was out on maneuvers with his best friend Smitty in Texas, as I say, during World War One. And one night they got the bright idea to take their 10-gallon hats off, fill them with beer, and feed them to their horses. The horses collapsed on the ground, and his father was put into the brig with his friend Smitty for a couple of days. And Ray Hyman would always say to me his favorite movie of all time was Blazing Saddles, because every time he saw it, he thought of his dad. When he was about 6 or 7 years old, he met this young little Irish girl, and he said to himself, "That's the girl I'm going to marry." At the age of 13, his mother worked in the garment industry. He was pretty much out and about on his own. At the age of 13, he decides he's going to join the military, and he joined some sea transport crew. And after about a month or two, he comes before a juvenile judge who says to him, "Young man, if you come before me again before the age of 16, I'm sending you as a delinquent to a reform school." So Ray waits until he's 16 and he joins the Navy. And he's down in the South Pacific, involved in a bunch of activities. And he sees on the bulletin board, they're looking for volunteers for this new type of warfare called underwater demolition team, UDT, called Naked Warriors. Their whole job was to go in before the Marine landings and to ascertain the landing site and to see as clearly and as carefully as possible the best way for Marines to land to minimize their casualties as much as possible. The only weapon they had was a knife. They had a chalkboard to just kind of outlay the beachways for the incoming Marines. And Ray was involved in several landings, one of which was Iwo Jima. And in Iwo Jima, he went in the second or third wave. There's all these dead Marines laying on the ground, on sand, uncovered. And Ray takes his poncho and covers the dead Marine. And officer yells at him, "Uncover that man." And Ray says, "No, sir. Uncover that man, I'll have you court-martialed." "Sir, court-martial if you will, but I'm not going to uncover him." We'll come back to that a little bit later. But the invasion of Okinawa, which was April 1st, Easter Sunday, 1945, the UDT men were told to avoid all signs of stealth, to make as much noise as possible. They were given hand grenades, natural charges, whatever they could handle to make as much noise as possible. Ideally, I can't think of the word right now, to move as many Japanese from one end of the island to the other. And they were very successful. One division, about 10,000 Japanese, went from one end of the island to the other. And as bad as Marine casualties were for Okinawa, they were a lot less than they had expected. Ray would say to me from time to time, he considered that the greatest military April Fool of all time, April 1st, 1945. I'm going to write a story about it. Never got a chance to write it, but I was happy to write it for him. I would call him every couple of weeks, a month. Hey, we talk on the phone and so forth. I called him one day. I said, "Ray, Bob Abate here. How you doing?" He said, "Oh," he said, I'm dying. I said, "Oh, my God, Ray, what is it?" He had cancer of the larynx, and he was dying. I said, "Ray, I'm so sorry." He said, No. I said, "I should have died in the war. So what's killing me? Some guy, some SOB's got my fins." I said, "Ray, what are you talking about?" Ray had gotten a phone call earlier that week, the collector on the West Coast. The guy called him up and he said, "Are you Ray Hyman from UDT Team 14? I said, "Yeah, who are you?" I said, "Well, I got your fins. I got them off the internet. I would appreciate it if you would send me a letter of some sort verifying He's a legitimate World War II vet. Ray understandably ripped him a you-know-what. And I said to Ray, I said, do me a favor. What information do you have? I had his phone number. And he had this thing, what do you call this mail? He had his email address. Give me that. And I said, if he calls, do not talk to him. Don't call him. And I went on the internet with his email address and with his phone number. I was able to find his address. I was able to get the address of 2 or 3 other people not too far from him, which was my plan B if we had to use it. And I called the guy up because what happened is Ray would go down every few years to the Steel Museum in Fort Pierce, Florida, for a reunion. And the modern day SEALs, the UDT guys were the forerunners of the Navy SEAL, but look upon these UTT guys as honorary fathers and grandfathers. And he had his pens in a showcase. This last time he went down, they weren't there, and he asked the proprietor, where are my pens? The guy said, oh, we're renovating. They're in a warehouse, and we'll put them back when we're finished. And he had no reason to doubt it. So as I said, he gets a call from this guy. I call the guy up. I said, look, Ray is going to die. He never had children. He married that young Irish girl. He never had children. And to him, these sins are as important to him as your family, your children, your grandkids are to you. You've got to lend me those sins, and one phrase no longer what to send them. He said, oh, no, I'm not doing that. I said, let me ask you a question. Your email address references L.A. Fireboat. What is that all about? He said, well, I'm a fireman. Los Angeles Fire Department. I'm in their river patrol. I said, oh, what job? I said, I can't tell you how happy that makes me. I said, my dad was a New York City fireman. The only reason men become firemen are to save lives. That save lives. You cannot save life physically. Asking you, these seminars. Let me ask you this. Was your father in World War II? Yeah. I said, where did your father serve? He was in the Navy. I said, where was he in the Navy? Whereabouts? He said, the South Pacific. I said, let's think about this. Your dad and Ray are in the South Pacific, in the Navy, in the same water, fighting the same enemy. You ask your dad what he thinks you should do. He said, I can't. He's been dead a few years. I'm sorry to hear that. Look, I want you to think about our conversation. I'm going to call you back in the morning. It's a restless start. I didn't sleep much. Call him in the morning. He says, what's your mailing address? I said, oh, God, I can't tell you how happy I am. Let me ask you this. What made you change your mind? I talked to my dad last night. He told me to do the right thing. So a couple of days later, I get the fin. I call Ray up. I say, Ray, got good news. I got your fin. Bob, don't BS me. That's no joke. I said, Ray, I've got him right here in my hand. Ray says to me, Bob, I love you like a son. Don't take this personal, but I can't believe you. You got to feed him. I said, no problem. Out of my car, I drove up. I gave him a fin. Ray also, about 2 or 3 years prior, had received in the mail, in a brown manila envelope, not even with a return address, a presidential unit citation from the then Secretary of the Navy in 1945. He gets it here in like 1995. Talk about mail delivery. And it was his presidential unit citation from his actions during the invasion of Iwo Jima, April 1st, 1945. And I thought to myself, let me see if I can get some retired military guy to make a presentation. And I thought, let me call my congressman's office. It was a Congress lady named Sue Kelly. I called her office. I told her my story. And about 2 days later, Congresswoman Kelly called me up and says, Bob, would you mind if I personally made the presentation to Ray Hyman? I said, oh, that'd be wonderful. My wife, my daughter, and I were invited to the presentation. And we get upstairs. There's a whole bunch of news media outside. He makes the presentation to Ray of his presidential unit citation. His paper was there, did a nice article. And I see her off in the corner, and she's crying. So I walk over, and I said, excuse me. I said, is everything okay? And she said, oh, yeah, it is, yeah. The reason I'm crying is my uncle was a Marine out of Iwo Jima. And Ray was telling me how he covered that dead Marine. He says, I know it wasn't my uncle, but I'd like to think maybe it was. But once again, you never quite know how one action the years prior can affect somebody 15 years later. So about a week or two later, Ray calls me up. It's winter time. Says, Bob, I got a problem. I got this driveway. It's planted. My car's in the garage. I don't think I'm going to be able to get up the driveway. I have to go to the hospital. I don't know what to do. I said, Ray, no problem. I'll be right up. So I go up and I start to shovel this driveway. And I turn around, I see he's standing down in the driveway in his garage with his wife in his pajamas. And I yell out, I said, Ray, for Christ's sake, go back in. You get pneumonia. And he looked at me and he kind of smiled. He said, what do you mean pneumonia? He said, I'm going to be dead in a couple of weeks, for God's sake. You can't argue with Ray. I go back to shoveling. As I'm shoveling, he see him passing me up the driveway, and he slips his pajamas. And I yell out, Ray, where the heck you going? He said, oh, no problem. I'm just going to go to the top of the driveway, get my mail. He goes up, he opens the mailbox, out with his mail. He does a 180. He's on the ground. He's saying, Bob, I can't get up. My first reaction was to go over and grab him by the shoulders, but I feel bone. And the last thing I want to do is break anything. I grab the front of his pajamas and lift him up. As I'm lifting him up, I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, this is the way it's done. And he is the man that fought the Japanese in the South Pacific, and now he's like a rag doll in my arms. And within a month or two, he was dead. And in his casket, bolted across his chest where it said, once the funeral was over, I got the fence and sent it back to the guy in the West Coast. Has him in a place of honor in the West Coast. So that's my raising story.
That's an awesome story. I've loved hearing that. I don't know, I think when you start in on doing these histories and you start getting these connections with people, it leads in so many different directions, and it leads to such a deep connection with some of the folks. Bob, I do want to ask you, though, too, did you happen to go in and capture any of the stories of people that were working on the home front, any of the dock workers, especially up around New York?
No, they played a very important part. Unfortunately, in the program I had from the newspaper with all the pictures and so forth, they were all basically military people, but certainly the people on the home front, without the home front, I mean, literally, we were the manufacturing capital of the world. And the ladies working, in many cases, ladies working Rosie the Riveters and all of their similar people. I interviewed some ladies who were not on the home front. They were actually over in battle conditions, but they were not in actual combat. I interviewed a lady who was the first African-American woman in the U.S. Coast Guard. I interviewed a woman who was in the Red Cross in the South Pacific with a number of stories of her administering to the wounded veterans. I interviewed a lady who was with Eisenhower and his staff on the mainland in England, and then on to the mainland of Europe after the invasion of D-Day. But nobody actually that was not involved in a combat area. I just didn't have the time to do all of that.
One thing I've got to ask you, too, that I'm curious, and we'll start to wrap things up here soon, but, where are those tapes that you used for these interviews?
They're all in my room upstairs. I'm in the process now, very slowly, of getting some of these tapes transcribed, but I find there's not a whole lot of interest. I don't want to get involved there.
Right.
But they're in my house. I've got roughly 200 plus hours of tapes, and I'm in the process, as I say, of slowly getting them transcribed. They're not in great physical condition. I have all the transcripts of all the men. I wrote a book. It was never published. I called it Ordinary Heroes in Their Own Words, from Pearl Harbor to D-Day to Tokyo Bay. And with the exception of a brief introduction, every word in the book is their wording. But I find that there's a lot of disinterest in people these days. As crazy as it sounds, when one of my guys dies and I get his obituary and I'm able to contact the next of kin, and I'll tell them I interviewed your father, I've got a transcript which I could copy, more times than not, the answer is, well, I don't know, let me think about it. I'll ask for their phone number. And I'll wait a month or two and I'll call them back a second time. And I'll say, I just wanted to check out the interview with your father. Would you like a transcript? And invariably it's going to be, oh, well, I don't. And I believe in baseball, 3 strikes are out. I'll never call the person a third time. Families are complicated. I don't understand it, but I accept it. And as I say, it happens to me more times than not. And I'll go one step further. I will offer, especially around Memorial Day and Veterans Day, I'll contact local military organizations, VFWs, American Legions, volunteer to come in and share some of the stories. And with rare exception, there's no response. Well, I can't explain it.
Wow. Yeah, I was curious if there were any plans working with the Yonkers Public Library or anybody to get these things digitized.
Well, I'm working right now, as I say, slowly with the Yonkers Public Library. There's a wonderful young man there who's been helping me. But as I say, it's a long, tedious process.
I would like to ask you too, is what advice would you have for anybody that would like to start capturing oral histories, whether it's veterans, family members, whoever?
I would basically say I understand as well as a non-participant and what you've been through. Realize by saying that I have no real concept of all of what you've been through, except it's got to be phenomenally, emotional and psychological. And the last thing I want to do is to have you visit someplace you don't want to visit. So I'm here to listen. I'm not here to ask. I'm here to listen. You want to tell me, that's wonderful. If you don't, I understand. But I'm here to listen, not to ask. And I thank you in advance for your time and your consideration.
That's good advice. Now, Bob, where can people find you? Where can people learn more about the histories that you've worked on?
I am more than happy to contact people 2 ways, through email and through my home phone number. My home phone number is area code 914-968-0914. Let me repeat that. Phone number is 914-968-0914. Email is rptaabate@gmail.com. Let me repeat that correctly. rptaabate@gmail.com.
Okay, perfect. I've got that. And Bob, I'll be sure to put those into the show notes and everything that's going to be on the website so that people can make sure if they want to reach out to you for any other information or anything, that they've got that accurate information that they can do that.
Wonderful.
So, Bob, was there anything about capturing oral histories or the work that you've done with the World War II veterans that you'd like to bring up that maybe I haven't asked you?
Well, I just say to people that, to me, there is no such day as Memorial Day 1 day a year or Veterans 1 day a year, because as one of my D-Day survivors said to me, we gave all of our tomorrows for all of your todays. And to me, every day is Memorial Day and every day is Veterans Day, because every one of us reaps the benefit of their sacrifice and service every day of our life. And without their sacrifice and service, we wouldn't have our life, our family, our friends, the lives we'd live. So to me, every day is Veterans Day and every day is Memorial Day, and it should be for every one of us.
Oh, that's great wisdom there, and really appreciate it. And Bob, thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. I really have enjoyed this conversation with you.
Well, I've enjoyed the opportunity. Also, I thank you and your listeners.
I appreciated Bob taking time out of his day to sit down with me on the Cool Grandpa podcast to talk about his experience with capturing the oral histories of these World War II vets. It was incredible to hear some of these stories that he was sharing with us. And Also, too, it was really interesting to learn about Bob's journey and his career path and how some of those changes actually led him into a place where he could begin capturing those histories and be able to sit down and work with those veterans, and just the time and the love that he had for the people in his community that went off and served in World War II. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I know this is coming out over the weekend of Veterans Day holiday weekend. So do me a favor. If you enjoyed this conversation, if it touched you a little bit, please forward this over, share it with somebody that would also enjoy learning about Bob's history and his passion for capturing some of these stories. So until next time, remember to stay cool.